Just a little background on the Haykal. This was revealed during the period that Baha'u'llah was in Adrianople, and is the commencement, if you will, of the great proclamation of Baha'u'llah to the leaders and rulers of mankind. And as we can tell from the content, it was revealed after the days of stress, the days when Mirza Yahya was agitating to the point where Baha'u'llah finally expelled him from the community and separated himself from the Babis that were following Yahya. I think we can see in the text itself that the actions of Yahya that were internal, Baha'u'llah just covered. He didn't, the fact that he'd been poisoned, the fact that all kinds of incriminations and rumors were spread about him by Mirza Yahya. It was only when Yahya had sent Sayyid Muhammad Isfahani to the capital and he complained to the officials that Baha'u'llah had not given him any portion of the income that they had as exiles there, and various other accusations which then endangered the name of the community itself rather than being personal affronts to the person of Baha'u'llah. That comes out in the text of the faith of the document itself, so we'll see that. Now, you know that Shoghi Effendi extols this period in Adrianople as the zenith of Baha'u'llah's mission. If you will, the phases of the appearance of the Son of Truth. You have it dawning in Tehran with the experience of Baha'u'llah in the Seyed-Shal, his annunciation, the intimation of his mission that God gave him there, and then that's like the dawn of his ministry. Then mid-morning, if you will, if we're making an arc out of it, mid-morning is the declaration in Baghdad, and then it moves on to the zenith, the full midday splendor of the proclamation of Baha'u'llah's ministry. The revelation reaches its apex there, and then it moves on with the exile to Akká, with the revelation, the continuation of that power. A sequel to the proclamation to the kings is also revealed in Akká, after Baha'u'llah arrives in Akká. And then, of course, with the revelation of the Kitab-i Aqdas and supplementary tablets, that was like afternoon splendor, and finally we have the ascension of Baha'u'llah. So those are the stages of the appearance of the Son of Truth in the person of Baha'u'llah. And this is really outside of, there's one prelude. The proclamation itself can be divided into three parts. There's the prelude, the proclamation proper, and the sequel. The prelude is the tablet that Baha'u'llah revealed to Abdulaziz, the Sultan, very powerful from what we can understand. Perhaps you remember seeing the report of Nabil has recorded the person that carried this tablet gave it to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister looked at it and made some exclamations of the sort that paled completely, and he said, this is if the King of Kings were addressing his most abject subject. So the tone of that was definitely the opening, if you will, the trumpet blast of Baha'u'llah's proclamation to those individuals on the face of the planet who were responsible for the rest of us. You know, you say, well, why did he address the kings? Now, most of us don't have much background in the history and don't think of the importance of kings, but kings were absolute kings. They ruled everything. And the clergy were right there with them, supporting them or tying them in their positions. And so Baha'u'llah first addresses them, gives them an opportunity to recognize. And he says that if they had recognized, we would have moved to the most great peace in Baha'u'llah's lifetime. They would have had a terrific influence on the masses of mankind. But all of them lent a deaf ear, and some of them opposed, and except for Queen Victoria, who is rumored to have said that if this is of God it will endure, but didn't take any steps to support it in any way. We have a rejection from all these leaders of the message. And then we now have the consequences that we're living with. And that has been very graphically portrayed by Shoghi Effendi in the work Promised Day Has Come. And if you haven't read that, or you haven't read it recently, I urge you to pick that up again, because it tells the whole tale of the proclamation again, but it also clearly sets forth the consequences of what happened to these individual rulers and in general to kingship in the world. You don't hear much about it these days, except that they're dying or they've run off with somebody else's wife or something. Now the Surah of the temple itself has a history, a triple history. It was revealed originally, as we said, in Adrianople, and once Baha'u'llah reached Akká, about a year after that, he revealed tablets to the individual rulers. That is, the tablet to the Pope Pius IX, to Napoleon, to Queen Victoria, and to Alexander of Russia, the Tsar of Russia. And he appended these to a fresh version of the Haykal. Now the house has determined there are 3 distinct Haykals. They are the same work, but they're not the same work. In other words, they've been revised. They've been re-revealed by Baha'u'llah. You can't say he revised and changed it, because the original one is just as valid as it always was. There are no mistakes that he needed to change it. But the context of the original one was very Babi directed. He was addressing the Babis. He was admonishing them. He was calling them to realize the misdeeds of Yahya and the mistake that they were making in not recognizing him. In the Akká version, Baha'u'llah broadens the call and broadens this proclamation and addresses it more to Muslim clergy in general, to Islam in general, and to the people of the world in general. So that changes its tone. Then finally, at the end of his ministry, in the last 4 years of his ministry, he called on Zainul Muqarrabin, who was his amanuensis, and Mirza Jan, who was his immediate aide and secretary, to call to his attention or to raise any points that might serve as items that were problematic to the clergy in the sense that they weren't in the traditional form of Arabic, that there was some orthographic mistake of some sort. So they say, oh, look, he's so stupid he didn't even know that you can't do that at the end of a word, you have to do this, that kind of thing. And there were maybe 10 items like that in the second Haykal, and they were corrected, and 1 paragraph was changed. And these were polished versions that Baha'u'llah himself approved the revisions, and then he sent them. Imagine, the manifestation of God, the supreme manifestation of God, sends for publication, after editing 2 volumes of his own works, sends them to Bombay, and they are published. That's a first in world history for sure. And it just shows how close we are to the authenticity, if you will, of Baha'u'llah's work. So that became the 3rd version of the Haykal, so to speak. When this was originally studied, the House saw all 3 versions. All 3 versions were viewed and approved, and it was decided for this book of the Summons of the Lord of Hosts to put the 3rd version. Recently, the House of Justice has looked at this matter again, and because of Shoghi Effendi having quoted some passages from the 2nd version, one of which is not in the 3rd version, they have opted on the website to put the 2nd version. So you'll find there's some little differences, nothing doctrinally major, But that's why you say, well, why is this way and that way? If it's infallible, how is it possible to change a comma or anything? Baha'u'llah, at the time that they made the revisions he said, but do not lose the originals, for they are in the grammar of the kingdom, and they will be studied especially as the divine words in the future. So the things that people were saying are mistakes, either of the Bab or Baha'u'llah, are really divinely ordained elements of a language that will reach its full fruition in studies in the future, I think. So that's good to know about. A word of caution. Whatever I say is my own view and ideas of things. I've been around a while, but some of the stuff is, obviously it's going to be my own take on it. As far as I understand, we're allowed to have our own individual views of the writings. In fact, there's nothing else we can hold to but that. And so when we hear each other, if the more breadth of experience we have, as far as, sorry. It's better you look at the light than me anyway. It's okay.
I'm going to move it up on top of the piano.
Will that work? Maybe that'll work. That'll be good. Still want to see the papers, so that's good. Yeah, that's lovely. All right, that's fine. So, you say, oh, I have had some advantages. I've been at the liaison of the house with the research archives department in the Holy Land for some years, and was involved in the preparation of all these texts. So some of the things I'm able to answer with some experience, insight, but you have to weigh everything against what you know from the writings yourself. And that anybody that, except Ghaneh, of course, anybody that says anything to you, I don't want to speak for him, he can make his own apologies. Anybody can, that you can hear, house member, hands of the cause, you always have to compare it with the revelation itself. Now, your understanding may not be up to their understanding, that's a possibility. But at the same time, that's the safest path for us all. In the Holy Land, hearing the hands of the cause give talks, sometimes I'd see one of the hands wince a little bit because the other hand had said something that wasn't quite the way he understood it, So even at that level, there were those interesting developments. Meanwhile, the words of the revelation, as I understand, reveal the meaning of the words. The verses reveal the meaning of the verses. The more breadth of contact you have with the books, with the writings of Baha'u'llah, the greater chance you have of seeing this in clarity. Of course, you want to bring in the interpretations of the master and the views of the guardian in clarification of various points. This is a bit of a time out from the normal activities of the 5-year plan, that we're having this celebration, if you will, of this particular work. I myself feel that these such times are justified because they energize us so that we go back to the plan with a fresh a lot of energy, and we want to be moving forward with the goals of the House of Justice, a particularly critical period now till Rizwan, to accelerate the number of programs of growth all over the world. And so let us hope that through the studies that we might accomplish today, that we can draw closer to Baha'u'llah, draw nigh unto Baha'u'llah, so as Shoghi Effendi says, he may draw nigh unto us. There's always this element of free choice in the individual. We have to move. We have to love him that he can love us. We have to move towards the revelation. We have to try to, through our own choice, deepen ourselves in these words. And this is all, as you quite understand, is a long process. Now, we shouldn't be upset if some of us understand some of this in one way and some of us in another way. That's, as far as I can tell, the Bab has said that in the words of God, there are hidden meanings to every verse, to every word of every verse, and to every letter of every word of every verse. He goes on and he says, and these hidden meanings have mysterious significances, every one of them, and there's no end to them. And then he says those significances have internal mysteries to them. Now, these are not the exact words, but he gives 5 levels of within the meanings that flow to the heart of the individual through reading the verses of God and connecting with their significance, which has something to do with the level of receptivity and attentiveness and intention that we have as we approach the verses. So we come at them at different times, at different levels, and the meanings flow to us. So there's infinite meanings. Let us be warned that not any meaning we can think of is one of those meanings, necessarily. But that there is a great range of possibilities in our understanding. And we grow with them as we study the words of God. No simple matter. Baha'u'llah has commanded us to immerse ourselves in the ocean of his words, of his teachings. This requires quite a bit of attention. Most of our lives don't permit, but some of our, as the Guardian said, leisure time. He hopes you'll use all your leisure time for reading the holy words of Baha'u'llah and absorbing that, because that's a transformative process. The more we absorb them, the more our previous notions prove to be ignorant. We remove them, and our vision of the cause is ever greater and ever brighter, and that vision then is communicated to others as we meet them, as we talk with them. So a lot to do with teaching the faith has to do with studying the faith, has to do with absorbing the real view of the revelation of what Baha'u'llah has given to us. This is so essential for us. So this is what we're endeavoring to do today. There are all kinds of elements and facets in this particular work that Shoghi Effendi characterizes as one of the most challenging of Baha'u'llah's writings. This is the most overriding of it starts right at the commencement of the work. There is the constant blending and moving back and forth between the manifestation of God as the Haykal and the word, the revealed word of God as the Haykal. Is it a man or is it a word? Is it a man or is it the verses? And both are the divine presence we see affirmed here in this work. The wondrous experience that those friends had who were able to enter the presence of Baha'u'llah and perceive to some degree the veiled splendor of majesty of his person was something that was available only in his lifetime. Then he passed away. But here he makes it clear that that divine presence then moves to the revealed verses of God. So you have the speaking book, who was the manifestation while he was alive, and you have the silent book, which is what he's left behind for us. And we can attain the divine presence throughout the dispensation, first in having approached his person, but second in having immersed ourselves in his verses. And you'll see that coming up more and more in the text. The text has an interesting, because of this, still reflects the tragedy and the calamity of Mirza Yahya's actions. Baha'u'llah is describing the glories of the day and promises of the future, the new race of men and so on, and then he'll move back to recounting some of the events that had to do with Yahya. And then a voice calls him. You would say must be the voice of God calling him. He says, leave that and come back to the glorification of the day of God. And then he starts in again with the very positive elements. But it alternates. The whole work alternates back and forth between these two elements, if you will. One of the things that immediately arises in considering the Haykal is who's the voice, who's speaking, and this is a very was a very challenging element to the friends. And on 2 occasions, they asked Baha'u'llah in the presence of Agha Jan, who noted down what Baha'u'llah said. One is in a tablet and one is in a note on the side of a tablet. The first one, he says that, who is speaking to whom here? He says, the addresser and the addressee, know thou that the addresser and the addressee, the one who's speaking and the one who's spoken to, are one and the same. In other words, he's created a drama from his inner voice and his outer voice for us to be able to better understand what actually is happening. On one hand, the manifestation of God has this twofold station. His identity with all the other manifestations of God as the primal will, as the voice of divinity itself, voice of God, you would say. Baha'u'llah, more than any of the previous manifestations, speaks in the first person. But in the Haykal, oftentimes there's this say in front of it, whereas, so you understand that's the inner voice, so to speak, addressing the outer voice. But he says at times in the tablet also the outer manifestation addresses the inner manifestation of God. Quite mysterious. But since we can't penetrate to the level of the essence of God, we see all that we see is what's reflected in the manifestation and his revelation. That becomes the face of God for us. That becomes the self of God. Although Baha'u'llah said, he's mere dust, his outer being is quite submissive to the inner reality that he represents. Shoghi Effendi has said that the human element is always present, but it's subdued. The manifestation keeps it in control because he is the manifestation of God. But he has the human element. How he grieved when Nawab died. He knows that Nawab, his precious consort and wife, when she passed away, he knows that she's in the world of glory, and surely he knew all those things. But still the personal element was such that he had a hard time eating or drinking for several months and grieved in her absence, which also gives us some position, some understanding of how, when we have human emotions, we can't deny them altogether. They're part of what we've been given as a human reality. We were thinking to move forward some of this, Ghaneh and I have discussed ahead of time, that we read different paragraphs from it. We might go around, and who would like to read can read. If you don't want to read the passage, you can go on to the next person. And then in between, if you have questions or comments, or if we have something to add that we'd like to add, we can do that ourselves. But before we move on to that, Ghaneh, I know, has been thinking a lot about this subject, and I'd like him to address us and give us an idea of what's on his mind as well.
Well, it's a real pleasure being here. I was given a whole week to prepare, so thank you for that. But it's one of the blessings of being able to be at events such as this. And I think one of the blessings that anyone has experienced when they've had to present something about the Baha'i faith, either to other Baha'is or to seekers, is there's nothing that impels one more to study the writings than when you're given a specific time and date to prepare for. And I can honestly say that the few times in my life that I've lived up to the Guardian's expectation that we should spend at least a few hours studying the Word of God is these particular times. And so this last week I may be quite sleep deprived, so I apologize for that. I've been waking up at about 4:30, 5 o'clock to spend a few hours before going to work, and the evenings are useless because I have a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old, so that's gone. But I did want to touch a little bit on this idea and this concept of the depth of meanings. That, first of all, some of the meanings are quite challenging. And I think that's good for us. You know, there's in Persian culture, there's an individual called Mullah Nasruddin. I don't know if you've heard of him. But he's kind of the Aesop's fables of Persia. And depending upon if you have a favorable idea of mullahs or an unfavorable view of them, he's either incredibly smart or incredibly stupid. And so there's one particular story that I like where he's laying underneath a tree in the garden, and he's looking out at the garden and realizing what an amazing view God has provided for him. You know, this beautiful tree that he's under, and these beautiful vegetables and fruit and everything that's laid out before him. And as he's thinking about how wonderful God is, he realizes that God has made a mistake. And he turns to God and he says, "You do a lot of things right, but one of the things you messed up in is this." He says, "If you look at this tree, this is a mighty tree that I'm under, and you put these tiny apples on there. And if you look at the garden, there's this beautiful, huge watermelon that you've put on this tiny vine. It makes no sense." And as he was thinking about how smart he was, one of those apples descended from the tree, hit him on his head, and he said, "Never mind." And I think as Baha'is we can relate to that, because there are, it's all too often in my life that I've, looked at something in the writings and not really completely understood what it's talking about. And, that's when you have a challenge as a Baha'i to either say, God, you messed up, or, maybe there's some greater understanding that I'm not aware of. And at those particular times, it's good to do, as Shoghi Effendi told Ruhiya Khanum when he told her that the most corrupt of governments is the United States, and she was thinking, well, how, what about Iran and so forth? And when he saw her, doubting, he said to her, "Swallow it. It's good for you." So, in studying this tablet, there's been a lot of swallowing going on. But eventually, I think when you swallow it and you allow it to become a part of who you are, then it starts making sense. Mr. Dunbar was talking about this depth of meaning. And this is one of the things I think is the most exciting part of studying the Suriy-i-Haykal, is that as soon as one thinks one has approached a level of understanding, a new one is ripped out, and then you see a whole another layer below it. A couple years ago, I was at a devotional gathering where a number of seekers were invited to it, and the topic was on Thanksgiving, and we were all sitting around, and the host thought it was a good idea to go around and for everyone to say what they were thankful for. And so people started talking about how their back hurt and now it feels better and praise God. Or that they had developed the flu and, now they're healthy and praise God. And so everyone went around and talked about their ailments. And I was, it's my time coming up and I was getting a little nervous because I was thinking, what physical ailment have I suffered from that I'm now relieved on that I can talk about? And then as we were going around, I realized this is kind of silly. That, yes, on one level, physical suffering is something that we can ask for relief from and so forth, but in one sense, physical suffering is a great reminder for us about how, to prioritize things correctly. And, so I started sharing elements of that, and then I knew there were some very strong Christians by their, hallelujahs that came out after they'd been raised from the dead or whatever, and I was sensitive to that, and I just, I said, Christ was fully capable of performing miracles and raising people from the dead and taking lepers and healing them and so forth. And I said, but is there perhaps another meaning that's more deep than this superficial understanding of healing? And so I go into it and I start talking about how, that the Word of God is deep, that the value of a great poem is something that has layers of meaning. And is God not the greatest poet? Is the Word of God not the greatest poem that's ever written? So therefore the layers of meaning have to be infinite. And I brought up this passage that Mr. Dunbar was quoting from the Baha'u'lláh, where he says that every letter of the Word of God is endowed with a number of meanings equal to the number of atoms in the universe. And then he says, that's only the obvious meanings. So I was talking about this, and I said, when we're looking at the Word of God, when we're studying the Bible as Christians, it's important for us to not just look at the superficial level of understanding, important and valid as it may be, but try to pull back the layer of meaning, and you'll see a whole new, beautiful, even more valid layer of meanings beneath that. And just when you realize that that's such a beautiful vision, try pulling that back and see if there's an even more beautiful layer. And I said, eventually you'll get to the point where you realize that this process is infinite, and that the joy that you get from delving into the words of God never ends. At that point, one of the Christians started crying. And I get very uncomfortable when someone cries, because the first fireside that I gave at the age of 16, I made someone cry. And it wasn't the good kind of cry. So I was very content with not knowing why someone's crying and just, imagining there was something good. But the host ended up asking the person, why are you crying? And, she was actually a minister. And she said that she had a dream the week before that she did not know the meaning of until tonight. She said in her dream she'd seen this beautiful jewelry box. And on the jewelry box was written this beautiful writing that she didn't know the meaning of. But then she realized that this box had a lid. She lifted up the box, and there's a beautiful layer of jewels that were there. And she was in awe at the beauty of these jewels that she was seeing in her dream. But then she realized that in the side of it there was a little tab. And when she pulled up the tab, she realized that this was only one layer. And when she pulled that off, she saw an even more beautiful layer of jewels beneath that. And there was another tab, and she pulled that, and there was an even more beautiful layer. And she said in her dream she kept on pulling these layers back until she realized this was a bottomless box. So I was 1 for 2 as far as crying. So I think, this is going to be one of the fun exercises about studying the Suriy-i-Haykal, is trying to get some of this depth of meaning, trying to draw some of these things out.
It starts with the very first line, if you'll. This is the Surah of the temple which God hath ordained to be the mirror of his names between the heavens and the earth, and the sign of his remembrance amidst the peoples of the world. The translators raised the question with the House of Justice, should there be a comma after the word temple? Think about it a little bit. This is the Surah of the temple. Is it this Surah which God hath ordained to be the mirror of his names? This physical tablet? Without the comma, the temple becomes the manifestation of God, and he is then the mirror of his names and the sign of his remembrance. And the House said, leave the comma out. So it actually it's ambiguous in the Arabic whether you put it or not. So we need readers. I think it would be good if we read through some of this opening glorifications and blessings, almost like Beatitudes that Baha'u'llah begins the tablet with, and then we could comment on those after we have a little bit of that reading then. So maybe we could read through 1:5 through the 5th paragraph.
Would it be possible to talk a little bit about what temple means in Arabic?
Yeah, there's a lot to say there too.
So I think, in English, when we think of temple, the first thing that comes to mind in English is the architectural structure. The temple that was built by the Jews in Jerusalem. That's the first thing we think of. And then in the Bible, in the New Testament, Christ extends that definition to refer to his own body, to his own self, that he is now the temple. And in Arabic, and I will freely admit that I don't understand Arabic, but from what I'm told, in Arabic the meaning is different. The first thing that comes to mind is the idea of a physical temple, the physical body. And the second thing that comes to mind, and we'll see this play in the Suriy-i-Haykal, is this concept of its representation in the writings of the Bab as being in the form of a tablet. That the Haykal itself, the first letter of the Haykal, H, has the numerical value of 5, according to the Abjad system. And so when the Bab was representing the tablets, he sometimes would represent the tablets in the form of 5, with the 5-pointed star. You have an example of that there.
It's a little small, but you can see that's a Haykal in Babi representation. It's not the one that Baha'u'llah ordered, but he ordered it written in the same form, and he described what to put in this upper star part, and the 2 arms and the 2 legs, and what were all the different elements of the full Suriy-i-Haykal. That is the composite along with the tablets to the kings and the Suriy-i-Muluk.
Yes, so the star itself has the top part, which is the head, the 2 extended parts, which are the arms, and the bottom 2 extended parts, which are the legs, and it's got the body itself. So the tablet itself becomes represented as a physical body, and the body becomes represented in the tablet. So there's that interplay, and that's I think the primary meaning. There is, those 2 meanings. There is a third meaning of temple, which is understood as representing the physical temple as well. But that's not something that, from my reading of it, is really mentioned in the Suriy-i-Haykal, except in the last paragraph, in paragraph 276, is the only time that I've seen it mentioned regarding this actual physical temple that was built.
Mm-hmm.
How big is the original pentacle,
We don't have it, so we don't know the size. But these were, I've seen some of the originals, they're about that size. They're not so big. But I think with this large one that Baha'u'llah ordered, it might have been a bigger, one has the impression it was a bigger item. We've touched on this now that Ghaneh has brought it up. Baha'u'llah, in compiling the Haykal, the composite Haykal, just for the sake of discussion here, this first part we'll call the discrete Haykal, and then the composite Haykal is with all the tablets to the kings attached to it. At the end of the collection, he added a paragraph in which he draws direct association with the prophecies of the Old Testament with the Haykal. And as Ghaneh said, that there's no place in the text itself, in the discrete Haykal, where the Haykal has the meaning of a building. But in this one he says, and this is the last, what was the paragraph number? You've got it there.
276.
276 in Summons. If you want to turn to it, it says, "Thus have we built the temple with the hands of power and might, could ye but know it. This is the temple promised unto you in the book, draw ye nigh unto it. This is that which profiteth you, could ye but comprehend it. Be fair, O peoples of the earth, which is preferable, this or a temple which is built of clay? Set your faces towards it. Thus have ye been commanded by God, the help in peril, the self-subsisting. Follow ye his bidding, and praise ye God your Lord for that which he hath bestowed upon you. He verily is the truth. No God is there but he. He revealeth what he pleaseth through his words. Be, and it is." I don't know if I had pen. the verses here from Jeremiah. They're from Jeremiah, the original verses. You can see that in the notes and go back and read the prophecies related to that. So I don't have those notes with me. Do you have the Bible verses that he's referring to? Maybe we'll come up with that cross-reference, biblical cross-reference later on. So we could go on with the reading then. One of you want to start reading?
He is the most wondrous, the all-glorious. Glorified is he who hath revealed his verses to those who understand. Glorified is he who sendeth down his verses to those who perceive. Glorified is he who guideth whomsoever he pleaseth unto his path. Say, I verily am the path of God unto all who are in the heavens and all who are on the earth. Well is it with them that hasten thereunto. Glorified is he who sendeth down his verses to those who comprehend. Glorified is he who speaketh forth from the kingdom of his revelation, and who remaineth unknown to all save his honored servants. Glorified is he who quickeneth whomsoever he willeth, by virtue of his word be, and it is. Glorified is he who causeth whomsoever he willeth to ascend into the heaven of grace, and sendeth down therefrom whatsoever he desireth, according to a prescribed measure.
Blessed is he who doeth as he willeth by a word of his command. He verily is the true one, the knower of things unseen. Blessed is he who inspireth whomsoever he willeth, with whatsoever he desireth, through his irresistible and inscrutable command. Blessed is he who aideth whomsoever he desireth, with a host of the unseen. His might is truth, equal to his purpose, and he verily is the all-glorious, the self-subsisting. Blessed is he who exalteth whomsoever he willeth by the power of his sovereign might, and confirmeth whomsoever he chooseth in accordance with his good pleasure. Well is it with them that understand.
Blessed is he who, in a well-guarded tablet, hath prescribed a fixed measure unto all things. Blessed is he who hath revealed unto his servant that which shall illumine the hearts and minds of men. Blessed is he who hath sent down upon his servant such tribulations as have melted the hearts of them that dwell within the tabernacle of eternity, and the souls of those who have drawn nigh unto their Lord. Blessed is he who hath showered upon his servant from the clouds of his decree the darts of affliction, and who beholdeth me enduring them with patience and fortitude. Blessed is he who hath ordained for his servant that which he hath destined for no other soul. He verily is the one, the incomparable, the self-subsisting.
Blessed is he who has caused to rain down upon his servant from the clouds of enmity, and at the hands of the people of denial, the shafts of tribulation and trial, and yet seeth our heart filled with gratitude. Blessed is he who hath laid upon the shoulders of his servant the burden of the heavens and of the earth, a burden for which we yield him every praise, though none may grasp this save them that are endued with this understanding. Glorified is he who hath surrendered the embodiment of his beauty to the clutches of the envious and the wicked, a fate unto which we are fully resigned, though none may perceive this save those who are endued with insight. Glorified is he who hath left Hussein to make his dwelling amidst the hosts of his enemies, and exposed his body with every breath to the spears of hatred and anger. Yet do we yield him thanks for all that he hath destined to befall his servant, who repaireth unto him in his affliction and grief. The note, Baha'u'llah's given name was Mirza Hussein Ali.
So we had an example in one of the paragraphs of the second version where it wasn't our reader that went off. She was reading a version that was the second version instead of the first version. So it's those slight little differences which we can take note of as we go along, as you'll see. Mostly the meaning was the same. All right. Anyone want to have any comments about these first paragraphs or ask any question?
I'm curious about the part that begins with glorified is he who hath surrendered the embodiment of his beauty to the clutches of the envious and the wicked.
1.5.
Yeah.
Yes, 1.5.
Okay, tell us what you're curious about.
I'm wondering if we can talk a little more on what that means. And give some more insight. Perspective on and just expand on it.
You know, those of you who've served around the world in different capacities as pioneers and so on, sometimes you've passed hunger, sometimes you've had terrible calamities befall you. You can't find anything in a human life that either the Bab or Baha'u'llah hasn't suffered before you. It's amazing that the example of their acceptance of trials becomes an archetype for our resigning ourselves to the things that we suffer, which he says those calamities are providence, divine providence. Outwardly fire and vengeance. Inwardly they're light and mercy because they clarify the soul. In one tablet, Abdu'l-Baha says that the greatest bounty for this inner light that we have is that it be surrounded by tempests at all times. That's the greatest protection we can have. Now, that's a mysterious kind of a truth. But if we think of this from an eternal point of view, that this life is but a flash, an instant, it's over. Vain and empty. The appearance of reality, but in reality is empty and vain. Everything that happens here really, except the brightening of that light that's within you, that is inherently within you, potentially within you, is there ready to be born and fanned into flame and come to fruition, doesn't have any significance. So when we go to the next world, we'll be so grateful that we had these trials and difficulties and problems and illness and everything, all kinds of things that we see basically as a humbug that don't allow us to serve the way we'd like to serve, or the way we imagine we might serve if we had more money and if we were more beautiful and if we had a greater means to move around in the world and so on. It's all very strange. That's just an insight from having lived in the jungle for a while. Yes.
It is. It's profoundly counterintuitive. The human being wants those creature comforts, and we think that the whole point in life is to get to a more comfortable place.
Yeah.
And this is so profound. What you're saying is that we need to be surrounded by those tempests. That's our protection.
He says it's as if this soul were a ship, and you have these immense waves crashing down on it all the time. It's very mysterious. This is in a tablet that you'll find in Fire and Light, which is in the bright red Baha'i world. There was a special compilation that's not published elsewhere. It's there at the beginning of that volume. What's the volume number? I've forgotten the volume number. I think it's 19 maybe. 18 maybe, yeah. Look that up. There's wonderful quotes there from the central figures about the sufferings and the persecutions in particular. That
That's on the internet too, the Fire and Line.
you can find it there, yeah. Yes, it's in the reference library now. I saw that it was there. Yeah.
So this particular sentence she's asking about then, it's talking about, it's like there's blessings even for one of the followers that ends up having to live in this camp of hatred and anger. So I don't know if that's symbolic of, just our lower nature, or if it's, what was going on at the time when he wrote this, because obviously a lot of the followers were living in very difficult situations.
Yeah, yes. Oh, we've already been through the bloodbath of the Babi period, 20,000 martyrs. It was very... you made a big decision when you decided you were going to follow the manifestation. But think of that infinite repercussions of that. He says, anybody's going to follow him when... after the world encircling trials are over and everything, and everybody says, oh yeah, it's wonderful. I love this faith, yeah. But the one that has to raise it and say, yeah, I believe this in the face of society and the family and maybe even their spouses, is really challenging. But what's the point of life if it's not this, We're raised with a certain consciousness. We are living by acquired knowledge, but we have to absorb the immediate, that knowledge which is light, which comes from the words of God, and we have to rehearse them. You have to use them all the time. Very careful fulfillment of the basic requirements that Baha'u'llah gives. He said, one, to recognize, and then strict observance. What strict observance? Abdu'l-Baha says there's two excuses for not saying the obligatory prayer. You're too sick to get out of bed to do it, or you're insane. You can take your choice. If you miss it, you can decide.
That's my choice.
Those are your two excuses. If you can sell those to God, I don't know. So this becomes very important. I mean, how... that we're strict with ourselves. That maybe it's not just that we said it or we didn't say the prayer. It's the attitude that we have, that openness to and submission to Him, which constantly requires us to act with free will. We choose to do what we do, and the accumulation of that free will, when it's to do the will of God, ends up right where we need to be, and it invites trials and calamities as well. It's all part of the process.
Baha'u'llah warns us not to be monks or to hide ourselves away, and yet the Guardian says we should read 3, 4, 5 hours a day. In your opinion, there's so many distractions out there in the old world, so how many hours, if we sleep for 8 and we're awake for 16, so how many hours can we be in study and,
you have to balance that against there's a story, Zayn al-Moghrabin I mentioned earlier. You've seen him in volume 1 of Revelation. He has a white beard and he has a very happy, radiant countenance, and he was the scribe of Baha'u'llah, who did his handwriting is exquisite, and all of the major writings Shoghi Effendi says refer to his copy of them first. That's the most authentic. And in fact, the man was such an extraordinary person that Baha'u'llah in a tablet says, so great is the purity of Zayn that any of my words that are in his hand are authentic without signature or seal. Imagine, this is like Baha'u'llah himself having done it, Zayn said in the later years of his life, he said, the Akdas is a great challenge. And my son and I, at least we've fulfilled one verse each. He said, my son he's very good at the one, don't tire yourself out with the repetition of verses. He fulfills that.
The light goes out.
I think I unplugged it somewhere. And he says, and the one that I've been able to do is respond to invitations to festivities with joy and gladness. But there is that other side that, he doesn't want us to get weary reading the words of God. So there's a measuring that has to take place. But the people that say, he says, verses in the morning, verses in the evening, I read a hidden word in the evening and one in the morning, and that's it. But what we're doing, I think what we have to remember what we're doing, it's as if we're replacing bad cells in our body with good cells. Every verse of God, as we think about it and meditate about it, it dispels and negates acquired knowledge, borrowed knowledge that's useless to us, and how we view the world and what we think about life. We really want to change our consciousness, and raising consciousness, this spiritual rebirth, so to speak, like approaching, depends on a steady diet of the words of God and thinking about them and meditating about them. But I don't think anybody can say, it's 1 hour, 2 hours, 5 hours. There may be periods in our life when you're able to do more of it. But the point is that if you have time to do it and you're attracted, do it. And if you're not attracted, pray that you get attracted. But I mean, if it's the Super Bowl, what can you do? That's the kind of thing we have to think. The kind of thing we have to think about. My wife and I, we don't know much about the sports. We were away from the States for 50 years. We came back, and everybody's talking about sports. And about this guy and that player. And what do you think of him? Well, I don't know. Was that football or basketball? What? People have filled their lives with all kinds of things. And we want to transcend that somehow.
The statement that you referred to, that I've paraphrased, that the greatest protection we have is being surrounded by, what did you say, Tim?
Trials and difficulties, you'll find the quotes there.
Plug in a word. But there's also the indications that God, Baha'u'llah, wants us to have comfort as well. And it's part of what the tablets are asking the kings to do, I think, is to
Yes,
make sure that their people have comfort. So
that's right.
It's not, there again is a balance. So how do we put those two thoughts together in our mind and not have discord over them?
Some of the youth would say, moderation, it says in the writing, so we should be moderate. Yeah, that's right. So I say, well, what's moderation, Is moderation the word of God, the standard of the world, get in the middle somewhere? In the Bible it says the Lord will spew the lukewarm from his mouth. The point is, so I said, the moderation is what Baha'u'llah says to do. Please don't do more than that. Don't pass the limits. You don't have to pass the limits, but be strict about obeying what he says. Now, the other thing is that once you're detached, once the affection that you have, your heart is centered on affection for God and love for God, that's what he wants, to be loved above and beyond all things, things being all the other things we want in our lives, Once that happens, then you're free. The things are for you, to make you happy. Good food, whatever you have is fine. So but get the proportions right. Until you have them right, better you starve, Sorry, that's a bit extreme, but
So it's fine then
I'm getting extreme in my old age, you forgive me.
for a leader to keep his people as prisoners as long as they believe. To oppress them and let them live in abject poverty as long as they believe, because then that's their tempest, and that's, it's like, where do we
Well, I think that's God's choice rather than the leader's choice. I think that's something else.
Force them to help the poor and to give comfort and to have sufficient for his people so that they're not in poverty and strain. But then, I don't know if anybody can articulate the difficulty I have in trying to be equanimous within oneself
with this desire to have tempests around you and recognize them as humbug, and
Wow.
and to be comfortable as well.
That's interesting. I never opened that section of the prayer book about tests and difficulties. I never asked for trials and difficulties. I prefer God's will in this matter, really. I would be a little frightened about that. So I think it's not that you're seeking calamities. That's not very healthy. But it's your attitude you have when you're visited with them. And the whole nature of our life is such that we're always losing loved ones and people are dying around us or getting ill. There's no end of it, So I think it's the question of the way we view things. You know that the hidden word, the best beloved of all things in my sight is justice. Through it you shall see with your own eyes and so on. So we're supposed to see with our own eyes. By the way, this word justice there is not justice in the house of justice. There are two words for it. And Adl, the house of justice, is the opposite of mercy. That is the application of law and mandate of punishment and so on. That's part of the justice part. But this other one, Insaf, is a question of fair-mindedness, of justice in the sense of being fair the way you see things. And he says this is the best beloved of all things in his sight. Now we judge things a lot, but we borrow opinions and views from other people, and he wants us to see with our own. And the revelation and the obligatory prayers and the fasting is the thing that endows us with the capacity to see justly and fairly and be sensitive to the inspiration that comes to us through the revelation. So that seems to me is an important difference. Now beyond that, he says that you'll never see me if you don't see me with my own eye. Then he says you should see with God's eyes and hear with his ears. Now what can that possibly mean? Except that you've absorbed the revelation to the point where it becomes your point of view. It becomes the light of your vision. That's, of course, what we're trying to aim at. And whatever trials and difficulties contribute to that, we'll be happy about it. If our orientation is correct, I think. But look at the Master. He's always trying to make people happy. You should be happy. If you're not happy in this day, when are you going to be happy? The joy, the humor, all of that is there too. It all has to be balanced. It's just, of course, the attitude we have to. So I don't know. It's a challenge. Sir.
I mean, the thing that I'm reminded of at this moment is the story of Thomas Breakwell. There's a book that came out called Memories of 9 Years in Akká by one of the secretaries of Abdul-Baha. And if you've not read that book, you should do so. And if there's one part in there that I would encourage you to read is the part about Thomas Breakwell. I mean, it's one of the most moving accounts of a lover of Abdul-Baha that I've ever read. And he writes a letter to Abdul-Baha praying that Abdul-Baha will bestow upon him calamities and afflictions. And the reason he does that is because he recognizes within his own self that when he's occupied with difficulties, there's no greater time for remembering God. And so he comes down with tuberculosis. And he sends another letter to Abdul-Baha saying, thank you for bestowing this affliction on me. He said, I've been able to teach many people in the hospital about the Baha'i faith because of this. And, because of this affliction, I've, become closer to God and it's allowed me to. And he says, please, may the afflictions that are, I'm paraphrasing, but may the afflictions that are being heaped upon me increase. And so he gets even more sick. And the letter that he sends, the series of letters that are recounted by the secretary of Abdul-Baha become increasingly powerful as far as their tone of love and absolute dedication to God. And I think, for individuals who have recognized the fact that, outwardly it is fire and vengeance, but inwardly it is light and mercy, for those individuals, these are things that are sought after. There's one Muslim long ago, who was a very mystical Muslim, but kind of took it to the extreme. He was depressed all of his life, but when his son passed away, he became exceedingly happy. And he said that he was asked why he's become so happy. He said, because God only tests those that he loves. He said, and this is a demonstration of his love for me. Kind of an extreme version, but I think it kind of illustrates the point that there is one set of rules and regulations operating for us if we want to live a particular life. And we can live a nice Baha'i life with one particular set of rules and regulations. And Ruhiyya Khanum refers to this as, she said that it's, in one of her talks, she said, there are rules and regulations for an airplane when it's on the ground, as far as which direction it can go, what it can do, what speed it can go at, and all of these things. But a completely different set of rules and regulations if it desires to fly.
She says that in relation to the guardian's letters, he'd advise people to do sensible things, He wouldn't require them to make sacrifices. But when they did make sacrifice, he was pleased and he would confirm it. And the main example of that is General Marion Jack, who was a pioneer, an older woman. She was in Bulgaria, and the war was coming, and Shughayy Effendi encouraged her to leave because she could get caught there and go to Switzerland and so on. And she wrote back and she said, I don't want to leave the context, Shughayy Effendi, couldn't I stay? And I want to stay. And he was so pleased about that. And at that time, Sofia was bombed, and she went with the masses on highway and walked out on the roads, and they slept in old churches and schoolhouses and things. And he said she's the archetype pioneer for men and women, east and west, young and old, black and white, the whole thing. She didn't speak Bulgarian, she spoke French. She kind of, with French, she somehow managed to get her message across. And she's the archetype pioneer for all of us. Interesting. She's buried in Sofia. Yes?
In the first and second paragraph, there is a distinction between understand and comprehend. Can you enlighten us on that distinction?
I don't have the Arabic here, and I don't know what it is. That's a good question. I'll go look and see if I can figure it out, but not today. You'll have to do it. You'll have to check with someone who knows maybe the variations.
Cooper?
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about the poetry of this opening section, the language itself, and I've always been powerfully interested in the way, especially in the first version of the Haykal, that Baha'u'llah addresses the Babis in this poetic, metaphorical language.
Yeah. The translators were making a series of notes. It's very hard to translate this, but they would say that the whole text vibrates, resonates with Arabic phrases from the Quran and from the Arabic Bible. The Arabic Bible had the name Baha'i in it in so many places. And the Bible Society, as they understood the importance of Baha'u'llah, and when Abdu'l-Baha came to the West, they took that and they translated to Greek. Instead of translating it to Baha, which it had been, they changed it to Jalal or something else. All the different places where the name of Baha was, it was so evident if you were reading the Bible in Arabic, that Baha'u'llah was mentioned every place. Interesting changes. But we miss that because we don't have the Arabic, and even you would need to be quite a scholar, so that a phrase, the combinations of a verb and an adjective here and there, again, they're resonating through the whole thing, so that it's in a sense, it's a kind of a divine pastiche of everything that's been revealed before. And that must resonate a lot in these first paragraphs, I should think, And to some degree, it becomes more opaque for us when we're reading it in English. Guess we'll have to wait a few generations before we all learn Arabic well enough to enjoy reading it and chanting it and penetrating its significances. So everybody knows about the word be and what it means? Sure. This is the divine fiat that with one commanding word he brought all creation into being. You see this in the writings and so on. This word is in the writings is kon. It's the letters, Arabic letters Qaf and Nun combined to become the command form kon. And as it's also in English, conveniently for the translators here, the Guardian translated, it was the be and the e are representative of those two elements, and that becomes a command form, be, and it is. Through his commanding word, he brings creation into being. Asked about this, there's several letters, there's also tablets explaining this, but the be and the e, he said that they refer to universal powers of God operating through the manifestation. So one of them is the divine will, this primal will. And so many places you see will and purpose are brought together in the prayers through his divine will and purpose. And the B stands for the will, and the E stands for the purpose of God. And these first two stages of the creative actions of God are linked together. And the B is masculine in character, and the E is feminine in character. And they give birth to the entire existence after that, from that, through various stages that are described in the writings of the Bab, and also described in some detail in Gate of the Heart by Nader Saidi. This is a book that if you're a student of the faith, if you're studying the writings, you want to try to get a hold of this book. It has the doctrines and philosophy of the Bab as distinct from the Dawnbreakers, which has the actions and acts of the Bab and the heroism of the Bab. It's been published by, Lauder University, I think, in Canada. You can get it through the Baha'i Association for Baha'i Studies. Gate of the Heart, Saidi. Probably nobody but the Persians can spell Saidi in the way he spells it.
Yeah, and I think this concept of wow as the B and the E being joined and knit together, that these are two very opposite natures to one another, that these completely opposite natures interact with each other, and that interaction of the B and the E, this divine and the human, coming together and interacting, that brings about birth to creation, is a strong point that we'll see later on in this tablet.
Also, in the Loy Hekmat, you have that which is the active element, the active principle, interacting with the passive principle, giving birth to all things. You see in the center of this tablet of wisdom that's in the tablets after the Aktas, there's an explanation there which will give you a little another facet of its use. You remember from the Agan, Baha'u'llah says, all things live and move and have their being in him. The manifestation is the supreme. I mean, he says that he's the wronged one of creation. He suffers more than anybody else. And you can say, well, what about the people in Laos or the different tortures that have gone on in the world? But the point is that we are the cells of Baha'u'llah's spiritual entity, that the manifestation of God is another, different from animals and humans. There's another level of being, which is the manifestation of God. And his spirit, Abdu'l-Baha says, this Holy Spirit of the manifestation, his consciousness, his knowledge, includes all of us as the elements. Just like we have this power, we feel everything in our body everywhere, we understand what's going on, we're constantly aware of it, we can focus on it if we want. And he has that with us as the elements of the spiritual body of mankind. He's breathing life into us, trying to awaken this dormant body in a sense that animates it. It's all there potential. He says, Abdu'l-Baha says, the kingdom of God is established. It will appear in the world by degrees. It's already been laid out by Baha'u'llah and the Bab. Gradually it comes alive in the individual souls. Why is it you can pray to God and you can pray to God and I can pray to God all at the same time? Nothing keeps him from anything else. But yet Baha'u'llah says the personality is in the manifestation. It's not the essence. It's so abstracted from us, the divine essence, that yes, we address that light, but it's the light that's coming through the manifestation. We don't have any other access to it. He says you can pray to God, not through the manifestation if you want. You're free to do that. But to the pilgrims, he sometimes said, if you want, but why wouldn't you use the words of the manifestation and address his reality? Because that's the closest thing. That's the greatest sign in creation of God himself.
I think the other thing to think about with regards to these first 5 paragraphs is who is speaking. And to whom? Have any thoughts on that from what we read?
Yeah.
To whom is interesting because in the first paragraph he talks about and verily he pleases unto his path. Glorified is he who guideth whomsoever he pleases unto his path. And say, I verily am the path of God unto all who are in the heavens, and all who are on earth. So it feels like he's addressing not only us here on earth, but also the multitudes who are also in heaven. So it feels like it's a continuation. It's not just us here on earth, but it's for all of us as we pass into the next world also.
It triggered something in me that is again my own idea, but I think it's confirmed in the writings, that Baha'u'llah has come to unite all who are in the heavens and all who are on the earth. And do you know the night journey of Muhammad and also the expressions of Enoch? The heavens are layered, and in each layer there's a throne, and on the throne is one of the manifestations of God, and then all of his followers are circling around him. So you have this strange reference in the Akká to Christ having ascended to the 4th heaven. So you're going 7 heavens. So you've got Christ in the 4th, Muhammad in the 5th, the Bab in the 6th, and Baha'u'llah the 7th. But this idea that maybe these worlds, up to this point, in the divine worlds, the followers of these different prophets have gone to their beloved. And that now Baha'u'llah is coming and not only uniting their followers on the face of the earth, but in the inner realms as well. Maybe something happening, because he keeps making reference to this unifying all those in the heavens as well. Which you would think, oh, they're all fixed fine, they've gone to the world of perfection, that's all finished. No. There's another tablet of Baha'u'llah, the Loy-Sayah, Tablet of the Traveler, in which the Spirit says to him, describe some of the things you've seen in the world of the Spirit. And he says, I went and I visited these groups. There was one group busy constantly mulling over and meditating about the positions for the obligatory prayer. And he said, I tried to insinuate and talk to them, but nobody would pay any attention. It's a very strange kind of a reference. So you can get stuck in the next world too, it seems like, Remember, he says, be careful, you don't want to be detached of anything in the heavens or the earth. The next world is a very real world as far as what we can see in the writings. Everything that's here is there. It has different meanings, okay, but it's not vapor, you're not sitting on cotton candy playing a ukulele or something. It's full society. It's got government. It's got everything, and the manifestation plays the supreme ruler there. And Abdu'l-Baha talks about a dream he saw one of the friends, one of the hands. He said he mentions the food in the place where he was teaching the faith. They had interesting new fruits or some strange. Just got everything. Obviously, you're not going to be without clothing. Obviously, we recognize each other. He says you'll recognize everyone you knew in this world. You'll recognize them in the next world. You see that now with the near-death experiences. People are talking about their relatives that are standing around the bed waiting for them. to pass on, and I think we've had a very limited view of immortality, and too many of us maybe just inherited it.
Yeah, oh, sorry, go
It's
ahead.
interesting to me when you were talking about the spirits focusing around each of the manifestations. I mean, it immediately created all these images in my mind, but I think what came out really clear to me is it's that love that every religion's talked about love as being like the most important thing. So when you create this energy, this vibration of love, that's then what it's attracted to. I mean, I don't know how you'd ever put that into painting, but I mean, if you have all these layers, the fourth layer, the fifth layer, I mean, this is like love, right? That's why we recognize each other, because of love. I mean, it's pretty potent. So how do we put that in something physical that we can see? That would be pretty cool.
Isn't relative, religious truth is relative and not absolute. So you've got your Christian view of eternity, and maybe you go to that, but that's getting transcended now. Too early, Shoghi Effendi said, whether the future manifestations will bring about interplanetary unity. This is the last stage for this planet, is the unification, oneness and wholeness of the human race. Recognize that's sublime, and it's destined to last 500,000 years of development. We're just at the very beginning, and we are really a dog race. I mean, we are the bottom. Mr. Olinga told me, he said, Shoghi Effendi said to him directly, he said, the Abdul Baha called this the hell of the planets. That's the most backward of all. Now, why? Because, and then, Mr. Linga said, I was surprised when he said that. He looked at me, he said, they still make war. How backward you have to get, that the creatures that God has created and provided everything they need to live in peace and harmony with each other, and they're busy blowing each other up. It is so backward and so evil that nothing in the whole of recorded history matches it. That's what he tells us. So, meanwhile, we absorb it as the way of life. People have, they have to somehow accommodate themselves to living in this. But there's such a wrong vision. How do we change our vision? This is it. Okay.
Yes.
Reference to heavens and the earth, there are multiple references to Bob's writing and Baha'u'llah's writing that puts us in the context of the heavens of the various religions, so that those who are, the heavens of the various religions have been illumined in this day, so that concept of heavens and earth of bringing the unity together is
Interesting,
specifically and explicitly defined as an action that is to take place by the prayers and writings from Baha'u'llah. So is it possible that the uniting of the heavens and the earth is in this context, not just the heavenly realm?
So, is Baha'u'llah the supreme manifestation for the universe, or for what? And Shoghi Effendi said he's the supreme manifestation, though it can't be limited. The nature of a supreme manifestation is such, but he is mainly for this planet.
True. Yeah. So the heavens and the earth
and its development, and the heavenly worlds related to it. Yeah.
And I think it goes down back to that, multiple layers of meaning. And I think you're absolutely right. That in the Kitab-i-Gan, Baha'u'llah refers to the heaven as representing the religion of God. Yeah, and so I think that would be a very valid interpretation of that. But I think the point is that there are multiple layers of interpretation. There's many ways that you can take that particular passage, and I think you correctly hit on one of those.
There was a webinar with John Hatcher, through the Wilmette Institute, and someone asked about what about, all of us, maybe most of us have non-Baha'i loved ones who have died, and so Dr. Hatcher addressed that, and I was thinking about the medium obligatory prayer. I think I emailed you once about that, Hooper, where it says, the call hath been proclaimed unto all who are in heaven. So even our non-Baha'i relatives that go there, they're part of the all who are in heaven. And then a little later in the medium obligatory prayer, it says, opened wide the door of thy grace to all that dwell in heaven. So nobody's left out. So anybody that's worried about it,
Yeah, my grandfather was a pioneer in Africa, and a very impoverished part of Africa. And, my father growing up didn't have very much money or anything. I mean, they really starved at certain points in their life. And my aunt had a dream, because my grandfather would go around and give firesides different places and traveled around Africa and didn't, just rest in one particular place, went around and did these things. And my aunt was telling me that she had a dream in which my grandfather was in the next world, and he was giving a fireside. And he goes up to her, because she was a little surprised about this. He said, they need firesides here too. He said, and they still don't pay me. So I think there is a reality to the next world that, I think, that's real. And there was one particular story that I read that just, kind of flashed that light within me that, this is a reality that's beyond what we think of, or what I thought of when I thought of the next world as being some kind of, vaporous existence. And, and this is one where Mirza Akká Jan is with Baha'u'llah, and Baha'u'llah is on the roof pacing up and down, and turns to Mirza Akká Jan and says, "Would you like to hear the Badi language?" He says, "This is the language spoken by the denizens of one of the other worlds of God." And Mirza Akká Jan, asked Baha'u'llah to do it, and he says that, "I didn't know what he was saying, but it had a wondrous effect upon my soul." So it gives an idea there's language in the next world. It's not necessarily this telepathic communication that we might necessarily think of. There's some material existence to the next world that is beyond what we're able to understand.
If you don't say material, substantial in any
Substantial,
case.
yes.
Is this fun or what? We're gonna take a break. We're a few minutes past our break time, and we'll reassemble in 15 minutes.